starting at 16 as a dishwasher at the family hotel, which was a large hotel, 4 degrees from Texas Tech, 1 later from Stanford, to now the CEO and managing director of a leading real estate company in Texas. Today's guest has traveled and he's learned a lot. Let's listen. Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
Man, welcome to Dupree Scovell, Managing Partner and Chief Investment Officer at Woodbine Development.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Come on, it's the first hat
Let's go.
on Decision Points.
That's right.
When did the hat start?
So I've there's some thought behind this. That my grandfather was a rancher from Brady, Texas.
Okay.
On my mom's side. My grandfather on my dad's side, a guy named Field Scovell, was a lifelong Dallasite, and he always wore fedoras because that was the time that you did. In fact, I wore a hat the other day in the office, and our former CFO, who'd been with us for 40 years, retired 10 or 15 years ago, he said, you know, your dad used to wear a hat in the office. And it kind of started clicking to me. I was like, I think all those things kind of, so this to me is in between a fedora and a cowboy hat.
What do we call this?
It's an open road.
Open Road.
Yeah.
There'll be a link at the bottom of this podcast where you can buy an Open Road, and all proceeds will go to his foundation.
I'm trying to get Stetson to sponsor me.
Stetson, if you're smart, call Dupree.
That's right.
I got like 28 of them now. I'm like, surely I can get somewhere on this thing.
Do you so do you wear it in the office?
I usually take it off when I go inside.
Yeah.
You know, the manners thing.
Yes.
Of course.
But when I meet a lady, same thing.
Yeah.
My mom told me I have to do that. But I'll wear it everywhere. I mean, I always say if you're going to wear a hat, you got to commit.
There's no doubt.
You can't be a halfway hatter. You're like,
right.
A halfway hatter.
Yeah.
Is it just so ubiquitous in your family? But like at 18, did you start wearing it? At 25?
Yeah, 15 years ago, I was in LA.
Okay.
And
You're living in LA.
I'm living in LA.
Okay.
I go to the airport, and this dude was wearing a hat in LA, and that just caught me by surprise. I mean, there's another funny story kind of about that, but I saw him and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna wear a hat. And because I saw him do it, and I was like, I'm gonna put a hat on, and I wore it, and I didn't like that hat because I feel like I look really dumb in a real cowboy hat, like the big
Right.
curved brim. It just doesn't work. My brother, he looks like a cowboy. He looks like, you know, somebody from Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
But for me, I was just like, I can't. So, and I found this hat actually because I saw a picture of LBJ. I was like,
yeah.
now that would be. So I grabbed it, and this was again 15 years ago. And I mean, I think I've worn it every day since just about. So and then I started collecting, and then I kind of started having fun with it, and I'd buy.
So you
a
were
vintage
rocking this in
one.
LA for how long did you wear it in LA?
Well, we were there. I mean, 9 years there. No, well, yeah, and the 10 years there, I guess, and then 5 years here. So. Yeah,
Well,
so
in LA, nobody thinks twice. Like it's just.
Well, it's funny because they don't even think it's cowboy hat, right? They look at it as like they just think it's the right, like, what is that? Is it
Right. It's like in between.
All right, we've wasted a lot of time on hats. Sorry, my bad.
So how many hats do you have?
I have 28 open roads.
28.
Bunch of other like cowboy hats, but you just started
Got a whole
collecting.
separate like
All
storage unit
different
in your.
Yeah. Well, I've got a really
all
cool
your
hat
hats.
wall. That's like an art piece to me, but
And that's called the garage because your wife's like, honey,
man.
we're not decorating with hats.
God bless my wife. It is front and center. It's center field. It is not the garage.
All right. We love hat talk. And you got Lonesome Dove worked in. It's also
let's
the
go.
first reference on
Love
Decision
Gus.
Points to
Love Gus.
Lonesome Dove, which is a shame. Shame on Scott and I for not getting that in sooner. So where are you from? Where were you raised?
Born and raised here in Dallas.
Okay.
Was not far from here in Preston Hollow, Franklin, and Hillcrest. So I was a public school kid the whole way through. My parents were passionate advocates of that. I followed my two brothers who were older than me. King, my middle brother, 2 years older than me, works with me at Woodbine. And then Field, my oldest brother's 8 years older than me. He's an orthopedic surgeon over at Carroll. So most of the time when I see people with a knee or an elbow, I'm like, what happened? I'm like, who'd you see? And they're like, you actually look like my doctor. I was like, that's my brother.
Do you wear a hat too?
No,
he doesn't.
He doesn't wear
There's another guy, Carol, who wears a hat a lot. We named this Decision Points for a reason. What are some early decision points in your journey that we call them hot stove moments. Maybe
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that again, or I'll always do that.
I mentioned this a little bit to you guys, but I read Bush's Decision Points book, and I thought it was the most interesting way to lay out kind of a memoir of someone's life. And as I started prepping for your podcast and listening to some of the others that have been on it, like John Altshuler or like Duval or some others that I respect and admire, I thought, well, that's a really interesting way to kind of think about life, and kind of started going through my own list of what are those things. Early in life, actually related to Bush, there was one that I think is kind of funny, but the two things early on in elementary school. But one was raffle tickets. I don't know if you guys ever had to sell raffle tickets. Everybody had to do something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I figured that game out real quick. So the raffle ticket thing, everybody's selling them one at a time in front of a grocery store and or to your aunt or to whatever. And I was like, this is not.
It's going to take forever.
Yeah.
You're going to work smarter, not harder, aren't you?
So I go over there to like west side of Preston Hollow, and I start going door to door. Now, you can't go door to door. You go estate gate.
You go to gate to
estate
gate.
And now, what do you think they do when they see a little kid out there? They're opening that gate, and they let me in. And I'm telling you, I met the most interesting people.
How many did Ross Perot buy? How many did Tom Hicks buy? How many?
I'm selling them by the hundreds. It was amazing.
You're selling the whole roll.
Yeah. So I come into the thing, and I'm smoking everybody year after year on this thing. And I did learn a few things on that. But number one, like, deeper water, bigger fish. That's just the way that it works. And I think there was something about, but also kind of the element of salesmanship, right? There's a part of that. And so those are one of the things where I said, that was just a life lesson that I kind of figured out pretty early. The second one was, so I ran for student council president when I was probably in I don't remember, I think it was 5th grade, maybe 4th grade. And so the Bush twins went to Preston Hollow.
Okay.
When he was, I guess before he was governor, would have made sense. And so now this was so I think it was 6th grade, maybe 92. No, it would have been earlier than that. Yeah, I think it was kind of 91 or 92. George Bush, 41, is running for president. And so now I had lost in 5th grade because I gave this very serious speech, and I had a tie on, and I'm like, we're going to put towels in the bathrooms, and we're going to have extra ice cream at lunch, whatever those things were. And so vote for Pedro. So then I came to 6th grade, and I was like, I know what the people want. That's what Mom said. I told her. So I decide that I'm going to impersonate 41 as my campaign speech. Now everybody else gets up there and gives their serious speech, and I go up there, and General Schwarzkopf was my running mate.
No way.
And I was George Bush Sr. Now 43 was in the audience because I was running against his daughter.
But you knew that ahead of time.
I think that's part of it. But so anyway, I give my speech impersonating George Bush, including the no new taxes line, get a standing O at the end. So I knew I'd done all right at that point. And my dad is sitting in the auditorium behind 43. And George Bush Jr. or 43 turns around and says, I think my dad just beat my daughter. Like a classic line of his,
That's so
right?
classic.
Amazing. Him. And so, but I think I figured a few things out of that, just in terms of moxie, like having a little bit of gumption in those moments, being able to kind of toe the line just a little bit, go a little bit farther than you need to. But I also think there's levity is an important tool in so many ways, and I think it expresses.
Full of sugar helps medicine go down.
I think there's a bit of humility in that too, of just kind of being able to laugh at yourself and have fun in those situations. So that was one of those moments where I think early on that there was some decision that I was like, I'm gonna go a different direction here, and I guess it paid off.
Can you do the impersonation of no new taxes? What can you muster that?
No taxes. Read my lips. You know, I had that draw. It was so good.
Oh, classic 43 too. What a comeback line for him to say to your dad.
I know, he's so good.
He's a smart, clever.
So it was amazing. Now it's not like we've known the family for a while, but it's not like we're close friends or anything. But when we were doing a deal years later, there was a common connection between Bush and this investor, and this investor calls Bush for a reference check. Says, hey, tell me about the Woodbine boys. And he says, oh man, those guys are so honest, you can play poker with them over the phone. And I was like, was like, golly, that is a. I mean, I don't. He
That's
probably,
that's a classic, like a West Texas.
God, so good, like right off the cuff, like, and I like to think that's true.
High school all the way through here in public school.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was important to your mom and dad?
There was a value of the neighborhood school, the idea of the neighborhood school. And even though they had the resources to go private, they felt like investing in the local school system was important. And it wasn't a Lone Ranger decision. It was also an attempt to be able to say, hey, let's get everybody around us to do the same thing. And so they were kind of a catalyst in our neighborhood to try and bring people to Preston Hollow. Because, of course, busing had started years before. The school was incredibly diverse. It was probably about a third demographically when I was there. And I think it was, I've kind of learned a lot as a parent since then. And I used to have kind of a grudge against public schools, or private schools, I should say. But I think you learn a lot, of course, when you have your own kids, that there are situations where that makes a lot of sense. And we were three fairly decent athletes that could level the playing field when you go to a public school where you're one of the only white kids on the team. And it's and all of a sudden you got friends from all walks of life, and so it was a beautiful thing for me. But I also realized it's not always a fit for everybody that way. And so I learned to appreciate that over time. But I love the fact that my parents took that stand, and I love the fact that my parents said, "This is what we're going to be about." And it wasn't just that school. My dad and mom got so involved with the district, and were doing so much to raise money for it and promote it and do everything they could to kind of to lift that up, because they felt like, and I still believe it's true today, so goes public schools, so goes the city. To the extent your workforce is educated and capable and college ready and create a skilled workforce for our city, it kind of starts and stops there. And so we've tried to follow some of the same path, and that's been fun for our own kids. But high school for us at Hillcrest was a great experience. And it was, there are guys that work with us today that were guys I went to high school with.
That's awesome.
And it's just it's a neat environment to be able to grow up in, because you do have friends who they grew up in the projects, or they grew up in South Dallas, or they have very different walks of life. But you really learn that those friendships can cross a lot of different divides. And so it was a neat experience for me. Hillcrest was probably one of those defining moments. There was one, I broke my collarbone when I was playing football my senior year.
How old are you?
I'm 42.
So you graduated high school.
99.
Well, I'm a lot older than you. I moved here in 88 and I lived, 88, the market was terrible. I lived in a home at Glendora and Thackeray for 2 years. My buddy and I paid like $200 in rent. As long as you kept it furnished. They were just trying to have homes look like, and I lived, 200 yards from Hillcrest, but you were in junior high.
Well, you were there. My brother was there. Field graduated in 92. King graduated in 97. I graduated in 99.
All right, so you broke your collarbone. I
broke my collarbone my senior year. And, Texas high school football, like your whole identity is wrapped up in, and it was for me anyway. It was wrapped up in that, and so I broke my collarbone in the first game. I'm sitting in the locker room, I'm crying. This coach comes up to me. His name's Coach T, big old dude, and he says, I'll never forget the line, but he says, "Hey, don't feel sorry for yourself," and kind of walks off. And you could have said a lot of things, but I was not expecting that one. But I think, I will never forget it. That was one of those moments where I was like, you know what? Like you got a choice. You got a decision to make. Either you let your circumstances define you and you go about it that way, which I think could have taken me down a lot of really wrong paths. Or you say, okay, we're going to bootstrap this and we're going to get through it. And so I kind of, probably because of that conversation, kind of decided to take a different route. And I realized that I didn't need to be, I didn't necessarily need to be on the field. I wanted to be, but there was a way to lead that team off the field. And so I became really focused on kind of leading that team a different way. I just so happened that was about the time when I had kind of come to know the Lord in my own walk with the Lord. And so for me, that season of life was interesting because now I had to rely on something other than myself. And it was a unique period of time for me to kind of find the Lord really kind of dig into that side of it and then go, okay, how do I lead the team in that direction? So that was an important moment for me, an important season that kind of changed the trajectory of my life for sure.
What were some of the things that you did to lead the team from like just kind of tangible examples?
Oh man, well, so this is probably, well, not probably, it is heresy. So of course, I mean, I've never read my Bible. I mean, I grew up kind of going to church, but didn't necessarily have a personal walk of faith.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily something that I really even understood.
Yeah.
So I pick up my Bible, and it had to have been the New Testament because I kind of understood what was going on. And I just started reading, and I made this decision just to kind of read every night. I don't know why. Well, I know why, the Holy Spirit. But I started reading. And so what I would do is then I would come to practice the next day, and I would I would translate the story that I read, the parable, to the team. So like the water into the wine was actually, it was a field party that Jesus was at, and he turned water into natty light, and there were kegs of, I mean, so that is like I'm not suggesting that that's not a New Living Translation.
You were contextualizing the gospel for your audience.
Yeah, there was so out of maybe real stretch, but nonetheless, then it became this thing. It was like, hey, what's the parable of the day? And so I kind of started digging in with that, and we had a little thing where I would encourage them before the game, and after the games we were praying. It was just kind of planting seeds the best way I knew how, which was not very well, but that was kind of how I started leading that team a different way, and kind of felt a place and purpose there. Maybe at the end of the day it was just for me. I'm not too sure, but that was kind of how I started to dig in with that route. And then of course that changes a lot of things because all your scholarships go away.
Yeah.
Everything kind of gets washed at that point. So
no one's calling you anymore, which is so, that affirmation is everything to really man or woman, especially, and then to an athlete.
That's exactly right. So then I had one option. It was kind of like, I could walk on at Texas Tech or I could not play.
Is this stat right? You got 4 degrees from Texas Tech. So did you think, again, volume was the key to success? How did you? So obviously you choose Texas Tech, and walk us through that, and walk us through 4 degrees at Texas Tech. And can you list all 4?
I can. I can. So there's this is a decision point. This is important.
That's why we're here.
So so when I walk on at Tech, that was something where I think 2 things on that. Number 1, you learn real quick where you stand as a walk-on.
Yeah.
You come in there and you are. It doesn't matter what your last name is. You are a nobody.
Nobody.
And you got 2 strikes against you at all times. That was number 1. Number 2, you learn how to work really hard.
Yeah.
And I saw my brother do it because he was just a grinder. That's just the way
he go to Tech as well?
He went to Tech as well.
Okay.
He also walked on and earned a scholarship.
Who's the coach when you're there?
Dykes was there when I first got there. Then he got let go that spring, and then Leach came in. So I played 4 years under Leach. Anytime Cliff would call, I mean, he was there. I mean, it didn't matter if 6 a.m., midnight. He's like, he would always run routes with him, and he would be the first one in the weight room. He'd be the last one to leave. And that was just the way Cliff was, too. He was just a grinder. And so I learned that real early. Like, first one there, last one to leave type of thing. So that was the kind of walk-on schooling. So as I kind of start to earn my stripes a little bit and get to a point where I was getting some play time and doing some different things like that, I quickly realized that this was not going to be a future career for me. That as a short white dude, you don't have a whole lot of odds. Although Wes Welker was who I was.
Yeah,
was my roommate and one of my best friends in my wedding and his, all those types of things. And I'm watching him do it. And I'm like, he's got something a little different than me.
Yeah. So you guys are roommates. He went to Tech?
He went to Tech.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he went to Tech. And so I kind of figured I'm probably going to be a special teams guy and a backup to him. Which I always wondered. When I'm in the game, which is to spell Wes most of the time, 9 out of 10 times it's a running play, and the defense never picked up on that. I'm like, well, who's scouting here? Let me help these guys out.
The receiver's getting a drink of water. I'm just a placeholder.
Number 26 is then. We're running the ball. Pretty simple.
Pretty obvious.
But so sophomore year, junior year actually is when I kind of started to say, you know what, I'm going to try and leverage the platform I have at Tech to do some different things. And so I just kind of made a decision to say, I'm going to go all in. And my mom actually was pretty critical in this early on because she helped me like lay out a schedule because I decided I would never take an elective.
Okay.
I just said, I'm going to take a course for another major always instead of an elective. And so I just literally mapped it out. And I was like, well, I can get 2 degrees this way because I'm going to be there every summer for workouts, so I might as well take a full load then. And then I was like, well, I can get 3 degrees this way. Well, then I ended up getting a scholarship. I was like, well, if I just do these 2 more, I can get 4 degrees. So it was one of those things where in the I guess the forethought at the front end of that was if I felt like, and this is not a slight attack on Tech, but it may be just being realistic, was I felt like 4 degrees from Tech if I wanted to go to grad school versus 1 degree from Yale or somewhere else. Maybe some ways of reading that application goes, well,
that's kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
It is. It set yourself apart.
That's a little more than, even though. And so I think that was kind of part of the thinking there. And so I just said, well, I'm going to go way involved. So I was president of fraternity, president of the Booster Club, started this nonprofit. All that kind of stuff was where I felt like I'm just going to be hyper involved and leverage the platform as a athlete to be able to do a lot of other things and set myself apart that way. And so it was kind of a distinct decision, a moment in time, and that was it.
What are the 4 degrees?
Management, marketing, finance, and general business.
Wow.
We're the 4. Yeah. I couldn't tell you much about either of them, all of them.
So looking back, like what's driving all that? Like what's underneath that, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it would parallel with my faith for sure. But I think so you grew up in a family like mine where my grandfather was so well known in Dallas because he helped start the Cotton Bowl. And my dad was so well known in Dallas because he helped bring the Final Four to town, and he did all these other great things that he was so civically involved and engaged and built Reunion Tower and with Mr. Hunt and did all these other things where you start to recognize that your name is kind of cast a bit of a shadow, and you kind of have 2 ways to go with that. Either you let that kind of either sink in the shadows, or you kind of emerge out from it. And so I think some of that initial drive was purely just about, kind of making a name for myself, and so much about my own ego, and so much about just success for succeeding or building a brand or building a resume or building, some kind of reputation, those types of things. But I think there was a shift because in high school, when I would say I accepted Christ and came to know the Lord, that was obviously just the beginning. In college, I kind of had a point in life where I was like, and it was actually around the same time this whole shift happened. It was kind of like either I was so tired of kind of living on both sides of the fence, if you will. I'm in the fraternity, kind of doing the fraternity things, but I'm proclaiming like outwardly, and I'm involved in Young Life, and I'm at least known as a Christian. And I wasn't a big drinker, and so at Tech, I always kind of call it like relative Christianity, because you look around and you're like, well, if I'm the only one that's not drinking, and I'm reading my Bible every once in a while, somebody's like, well, that guy might as well be the Pope.
Yeah, you're keeping score.
Yeah, and it was that's a real dangerous place to get into. And so what I think happened around my kind of sophomore, junior year, I kind of decided to go all in on my faith. And I said, I'm going to kind of start to forsake a lot of the things that I had been doing, chasing girls and drinking and doing the fraternity thing. And I'm going to go all in on the Lord and really kind of serve what I think his purpose is. And so my then life and trajectory and purpose changed, which it was less about myself. And look, if we're honest, a lot of those things still gratify our flesh.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it felt like I was serving what, and I guess the main takeaway I had from that was God had gifted me with a lot of different things, a platform, ability to lead, an ability to influence people. And so it was leveraging those gifts in a way that I felt like was advancing the kingdom. And so I think there was the question is very pointed because it was a shift. It was a change. I think it was originally for myself, but then I think it shifted to where it was for the Lord. I think that's the way it's kind of grown ever since then. But that was kind of the main decision point, actually, in between those 2 years of college, of kind of saying, this is the way I did it. That's not what I don't want that path.
Right.
I want to go a different direction.
Let's talk about your wife's name.
Jill.
When and where do you and Jill meet? Are you in college, post-college? Where? Tell us about how you and Jill meet. And
all right, so I'm gonna back up then.
All right, go.
Because there's a decision point here.
Clearly, one of the most important in life.
I'll preach this anytime I get a chance. But so number one, when I was at Trammell, I went to go work for Trammell Crow after.
Okay, we'll go back to that on the professional side. But
after tech, I come to work for Trammell Crow, and now it was in between going to work for Crow and where I was headed. So. There's a guy named Mark Fewen. I call him Coach. Most anybody who's like a boss or not, I just call him Coach.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just used to it. But Coach Fewen was a real important mentor and was willing to hire me at Trammell Crow. I'll tell you that story if we get time. But I had an option to go to a year-long seminary program, and I was kind of describing this to Mark, or to Coach Fewen, if you will, and I said, hey, I think I'm going to take this path. And he was gracious enough to kind of keep that Trammell Crow position open for me, and I'll get back to that. But I go to this seminary program, and I had the full intention where I was like, okay, I'm going there, and I'm dialed in. I don't want any. I just broken up with a longtime girlfriend. I'm done with that. I'm like focused.
Yeah.
And I get there. And there is this beautiful blonde.
And then this light descends upon Jill.
Gosh, oh, Freddie, I was so mad. So
God, I need to renegotiate that deal that we just had.
Exactly, I'm thinking about it.
Wasn't supposed to happen this way.
No, she's in the front row.
Because we're all really in charge of our lives.
That's exactly right. That's what we think we are. Well, so anyway, for that year though, we honored it, and we didn't date. I didn't date. She didn't date. We now everybody in the class was like, that's the only.
Would y'all just date already?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, that's the only girl you've ever said hi to in this whole class. Like, what's the deal?
Where is this?
So this is in Branson, Missouri. Actually.
Oh, this is the Institute. Yeah, we're both very familiar with Canada.
So
yeah. All right. Okay.
So that's where I met Jill. We don't date that whole time, but the last day of school, which I think, by the way, there's something to that, honoring a commitment to the Lord. When I decided, when that year was over. I asked her on a date that last day, and we started dating for about maybe a year and a half. Moved back to Dallas. She went to go work for Highland Park Pres. I went to go work for Trammell Crow. Kind of comes full circle. And then we were engaged for 6 months, married 17 years ago, and then the rest, as they say, is history.
Congratulations!
Yeah,
awesome.
That's a good story.
Now, I will say this. So, on the decision points theme, because I love this topic, I think there is so much about the world that deceives us into what marriage is supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
I think the world has convinced us of so many things. When you know, when it's a feeling that you have inside, and that feeling has to stay there, this romantic idea. I could not get my arms around that. I was like, I don't know that.
Yep.
And first of all, I'm not much of a feeler, but well, in some ways, I think I am now.
Yeah.
But that was real hard for me to get my arms around. And it really came down to not cerebral at all, but it came down to a similar faith decision. It came down to this idea that, can I commit in my heart of hearts to love this woman forever?
Yep.
And for her too.
Yep.
So that was one of those things where I literally had to kind of get over this idea that it was going to be a feeling, or that I would somehow be struck with light. I mean, I'm praying for a sign. I'm like, Lord, like, show me something.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for, rainbows in the sky or something.
Yeah.
And that's just not it. I think the Lord calls us to make a leap of faith at times and say, you're going to commit. You're going to, I need you to make that call. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of what ended up happening. I kind of had to get over my own fears and my own self-doubt and my own fear of commitment and all those other things to say, I'm in.
Yep.
That was it.
We both know. I'll call Chancey after this, trust but verify. And I'll say, did Dupree really not take Jill on one date for 12 months? So just know it's happening.
I'm good with that. I can stand up to it.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So y'all have kids?
We have 4 kids.
Yep.
We got 4 kids,
what are they
13,
up to?
10, 7, and 5. All over the map. We got athletes, we got theater kids, we got artists, we got princesses, we got knights, we got the whole thing. It's a fun crew. Fun time of life for us. Busy, of course, with 4, but a really sweet time for us.
That's awesome. Yep. Thanks for sharing that with us. All right, so you're at Tech. Walk us through kind of professionally what's starting to happen next.
So I came to Dallas after I graduated from Tech, and as I mentioned, I had the path to take. Either I was going to go seminary, I was going to take this job opening. Coach Fewen says, "Hey, I'll give you the option to come back," which is unheard of.
Yeah,
I take it. I take him at his word. I call him right in the last day. He says, "I got the spot open for you." And so I come to work for Trammell Crow, and like everybody does, started in leasing. And I mean, of course, Crow's the best training ground in the world. A lot of people would say, "Well, why didn't you go work for your dad at that point?" My dad would have said, actually did say it in front of me many times to many people. He would say, "Well, first of all, he doesn't know anything. Second of all, I'd rather somebody else train him on their dime, and then I can, then I might have a use for him." Now it sounds a little callous. My dad's a sweet guy, but
he is
serious.
a dad, and he's a businessman. He's like, if the Duvall's in, that's sorry.
Yeah, a little different.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah. No, they did a little different path. He came right in.
Yeah.
But for my dad, his view was, "Hey, I'd rather a Duval or a Crow train you.
Yeah.
And then you can come over here." Well, actually, he didn't even say you come over here. He said, "Then you might be worth your salt."
Then we could have a conversation.
Then we could have a conversation.
Really interesting.
Now, to be honest, though, I never had an ambition to come to Woodbine, and neither did my brother. My middle brother, King. My oldest brother, Field, of course, he went the doctor path, so that wasn't really an option. But I just never saw it as really an option. So I go work for Trammell Crow.
So you're not offended by it. It was just so
as a matter of fact,
clear. Matter of fact, is the word.
It wasn't a family business. So I didn't think of it like I needed to be there.
That's well said.
Or that I even deserved to be there.
How many people would have Woodbine been at that age? Is it
probably 55 people then? And my dad had been leading the company since 1972, and so roughly 30 years or so at that point. Well, a little bit more, probably 35 or so. And so when I came out and went to work for Trammell Crow and was in the leasing business, I was really energized by the hustle that it took. Because the funny thing about real estate business is generally it's actually fairly. In some ways, it's a meritocracy. I mean, you just kind of. If you're willing to work harder than the next guy, most of the time, it's going to pay out. It's going to pay off. But what I learned about in leasing, and I admire the guys that are in leasing or tenant rep, because the good ones they've got a gift for connecting people. They've got a gift for getting inside doors and talking to CEOs and kind of understanding how to solve real estate problems and things like that. And I felt like I had some of those skills. But just the idea of kind of connecting people for the space and then kind of getting out of the way and not really being part of the negotiation of making and executing the deal, that was probably the part that I found that I really wanted and that I enjoyed. And when you're in that position, at least the junior position that I was in, there's very little effect in that in that particular role. And so I learned pretty quickly that this really probably wasn't where I was going to excel. Now the development position opens up. This is probably 2000, maybe 4-ish. An analyst position, the development group opened up, and I didn't even know how to open Excel. So how I got hired in this position, I have no idea, and I'm sure.
Even with your 4 degrees from Texas Tech.
I'm telling you, yes, there's more to that. But I'm like, I mean, God bless the guys that had to take the spreadsheets that I was doing, because I can't imagine if it wasn't 2004 when every deal worked. It didn't matter if the spreadsheet was right or wrong. Because as long as it said 22 IRR, we were getting it financed and getting it built, because that was just the time. And so 04 to 07, I just thought this was the way the world worked.
Interesting.
You ran a spreadsheet, you bought the site, you developed it 12 months later, and you sold it. It was incredible. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I can literally kind of walk around Dallas or drive around Dallas and say that warehouse, those 2 office buildings, this, because that was just that was the time when it was just humming. Of course, 2008 happens.
You're still at Trammell Crow.
I am still at Trammell Crow. The world starts to come apart. I had actually applied to grad school. And I just kind of said, if I'm going to go to grad school, I'm going to apply to the best ones I can get into. Yep. Otherwise, I'm not going to go.
Yep.
And so I get into the one that I never thought I would get into in Stanford. And I remember I had a conversation with Bob Selenick, I don't know if you guys could get him on this. He'd be way better than me. But Selenick was the CEO of Trammell Crow, is now the CEO of CBRE. One of the smartest, most thoughtful leaders that I've ever been under. And because I was at Trammell Crow in Dallas, the Dallas office sits right under the corporate headquarters. And so by accident, you had access to every one of the kind of bigwigs up there. And I remember Bob, we had a lunch or something. I don't even think I arranged it, but I think he came down and said, hey, I hear you're thinking about grad school. And I was like, I am, but I'm in the position that I want to be in had I gone to grad school and come back.
Yeah.
I'm in the development role that I like. I love the action. I love the motion. I love the path that I can go on. And I remember he kind of looked at me, he said something like, son, like, I don't think you understand what's going on around here. Like, the world is about to fall apart. Mm. Like, you need to take this opportunity and you need to run with it.
Interesting.
And there's no way as an analyst in Dallas you could have had, I didn't, that I could have had the perspective that he had, seeing the entire world that Trammell Crow is involved in and saying, it's like, the house is burning.
There's a window here where you're going to have literally nothing to do.
100%. Well,
it may not have a job.
Exactly.
It may not have a job.
That's what he was telling me. He's like, look, son, you aren't going to have a job.
Yeah.
And he was kind enough to say that in a gracious way that even got through to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this and run with it. And so we go to Stanford, not ever thinking that would have been an option ever. And I often joke about it, and I do believe it, to be honest. I think I was an admissions mistake. I really genuinely believe it. I think somehow they're like, this kid, anyway, there's a lot.
No, there was a side bet. This knucklehead has 4 degrees from Texas Tech, which they had to look up what Texas Tech was, probably. Right. Let's see if he can actually do this. So there was probably a side bet going on between the admissions.
There's a funny story about that, actually. So there's a guy from, the admissions director went to TCU, and a guy named Derek Bolton, unbelievable guy, master of reading people, it's just a really neat guy, perfect for that role, still at Stanford in a much higher role now. But I think Derek, if I had to bet, I think Derek kind of took a chance on me, because after I got in to Stanford and I saw him on campus, we were kind of joking around. And he said, you should call the other guys from Tech that went to Stanford and let them know you got in. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And he kind of smirked at me. And I was kind of like, I'm starting to put 2 and 2 together. I'm like, what's the deal? He's like, you're the first kid.
Yeah.
I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Now, it's not that's not a slight of Tech at all, because there's a lot of Tech kids who've gone to Harvard, but just nobody had gone west.
Correct. Yeah.
And so it was a really kind of funny and unique thing that I'm proud of. But I think it more so. It's just I think Derek Bolton said I'm gonna take a chance on 100%. Him and bring him in here, because he's probably the only one that knew where Lubbock was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was it.
You graduate. Says you and Jill are married.
Married at that point now.
Yeah.
We got married in Dallas while I was at Trammell Crow. Been married about 3 or 4 years. Actually, no. Married a couple years, then grad school.
Yep.
So we had our first son there at Stanford.
Yep. So where do you go after you graduate?
So after I graduated Stanford.
Hang on one second.
Yeah, sure.
So going in, you already had the job you wanted.
Yes.
You were very happy professionally, career-wise. So going in, what are you thinking the goal is?
Oh, it's a great question. So I thought for sure the path was to come back
and do the
to
same
Trammell
thing.
Crow. And I think about this a lot, and I tell kids this a lot coming out, is if you can go into a company where you have a sponsor, where you have somebody who says, that's my guy, and where I go, he goes. Because that is the way that it works. Mm-hmm. And I had a few of those at Trammell Crow, where I knew I had guys above me, guys like Harry Lake or Mike Lafitte or even Selenick, I guess, way up the chain. but that I was like, those guys believe in me. I've got a chance to be able to come back and really climb that corporate ladder. And I think there was an interesting kind of path that the Lord took me on in that kind of arc. But I think what I wanted coming out of grad school, or what I thought I wanted actually kind of in the middle of grad school, was I want to go work for CBRE, which was now Trammell Crowe, is a part of the public company. And I want to work my way up to be the CEO of CBRE. And I mean, first of all, that ain't going to happen. Second of all, it was all about me. It was about it was just for my own ego. It was because I wanted to just prove to, I don't know who,
yourself and others,
somebody, that I could climb that ladder and get up there. And then I kind of went on a bit of an entrepreneurial venture, and some kind of providential conversations happened when I was kind of in between my first and second year of grad school, mainly with the Hunt family, because I was doing some work for them actually. And there were some really interesting conversations happen there that kind of changed my direction, because my ambition coming out of grad school was, initially I thought I'd go back there. Then I thought, okay, well, I actually want to start my own thing. Also completely naive. I want to start my own real estate fund, whatever that meant. I mean, I didn't even know what it meant, to be honest. But I had a couple of conversations that were really unique, again, with the Hunt family. And they were kind of like, now, let me get this straight. You want to start a real estate fund. Okay, that makes sense. You're going to give it a new name, a new brand. You're going to go hire people. You're going to do all these things. Now, meanwhile, Woodbine is sitting right here.
Yeah.
All those things exist, plus a 35-year track record. Help me understand what I'm missing in this whole equation. And there was some real wisdom in that, because at that point I really started thinking about, maybe there is a different path. The CFO at the time, who I mentioned earlier, a guy named Greg Mowat, had been kind of saying, hey, have you ever thought about coming here? And maybe looking at what you want to do entrepreneurially inside the Woodbine platform. And so those things then kind of lined up, and that's where I ended up making the decision to come into Woodbine. Now there's an inflection point there, because when you're deciding to go into a family business, and I think this is the mistake a lot of folks make, it's like anything else that we've talked about today. Either you're all chips in, or not at all. And I think oftentimes what I see is people put 3 stacks in and they're keeping 2 stacks over here. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. If you're going in the family business, you're saying, I'm all in, and basically I'm all in forever. If the Lord changes that down the road, that's up to him.
We make our plans if the Lord wills.
Yeah, but you got to go in and you got to say, this is what I'm doing. Because it's too easy to have a foot on each side of that fence and saying, well, if it gets tough, or if it doesn't go so well, or if I get in an argument with my brother, or if that doesn't happen, well, then I can always do something else. To me, it's like joining the Army.
Dupree, on the timing, does that mean from grad school, do you go to LA with Woodbine? Do you come here first? Walk us through some of because one of the things that we want to get to today, Dupree, is you just started to really talk about family business, and a lot of our listeners own family business. I want to get into the succession.
Sure.
And
you
have an older brother, but so as much as you're willing to kind of disclose and share the conversations tied to those things. So walk us through kind of that season.
What I wanted to do is, I felt like there was a path for Woodbine to grow. Both our geography and our capital relationships outside of Texas. And strategically, I felt like the best way to do that would be to go one of 2 directions, either southeast or west coast in LA. Not northwest, not NorCal, but SoCal. And really, if you kind of look at a heat map of where the branded assets in the world are, speaking of the hotel world, you kind of look at a map and you go, well, there's not a lot left. Or not as many. And so if you're going to raise your hand with an idea, then most oftentimes what happens is my dad says, great, then you do it. And so that was kind of what I decided to do. It was the last thing I ever thought I would do, but I go down to LA mainly because there was a mentor, a guy named Lou Wolf, who owned the Oakland A's, and he kind of was an old school guy that had basically the equivalent of an apprentice program.
Interesting.
And I was the 8th apprentice that he had basically. Now, and it's just one of those things where some of those guys worked for him, some of them didn't. He just worked in his office and worked next to him and go to lunch every week, and he'd mentor and he'd talk and he'd teach and he'd walk through deals. It was
wise, generous man.
It was remarkable. He opened his office to me, and so all those kind of doors lined up where we said, all right, we're going to LA.
Okay.
So we moved down there and we opened a West Coast office for Woodbine. Then we start getting active in development and acquisitions on the West Coast. Then we start raising capital on the West Coast. And it kind of did what we wanted it to do.
Wow.
And so that was a real important path for me, because now I'm in a place, and I think this is also important when you think about family business, where I had to be in a place where my name didn't matter.
Yep.
And in LA, nobody cares that you're a Scovell.
Yep.
Nobody even knows what that means. Nothing, right? And so it was 100% about kind of earning your keep, figuring your way in and out. And that was what gave me the confidence to be able to eventually come back to Woodbine and Dallas and say, okay, now we have created a much more diverse platform that has geographic diversity, that has capital diversification, that has brand diversification, that has chain scale diversification, which in the hotel world means select service hotels, full service hotels, everything in between.
Yep.
Right. That was what kind of pushed me, and I think gave me the confidence to be able to follow the steps that said, okay, we've opened this West Coast office. And then when we talk about transition, when we knew that now we were setting up a point for my brother and I to take control of the business, we set up a series of milestones over a 6-year period.
Okay.
The last of which was me moving back to Dallas.
Okay.
And so over that 6-year period of time, we hit a series of milestones, which was kind of things you would expect: growth of the business, top line revenue, number of assets, number of states we're in, different things like that were kind of showing us growing, number of people, even strategic initiatives, redefining values, redefining structure, all those types of things.
Cultural
things that I really like and enjoy. Once those things were kind of now in motion and in place, the last milestone was us moving back to Dallas.
Okay.
So that was 2019.
And was that milestone identified at the beginning of the process?
It was. Okay. And that was an architecture that we set out on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Just said, here's the things that we're going to do to be able to kind of let the succession of the business happen. So that, and the milestone of me moving back, by the way, was that then my brother and I would acquire the business finally from my dad. That was kind of the culminating event, which was supposed to happen in 19. For legal reasons, got delayed to 20, which couldn't have been more of a blessing, because now we were able to kind of value the business a different way.
Yep.
Which ended up doing two things: created less cash from my brother and I that we had to contribute to acquire the business, no longer needed debt to do it, and secondly, it reduced the tax impact on my dad. Those two were basically commensurate, and so that was important.
State the obvious, the fact that you all built a plan 6 years in the making and had clear milestones. Who's in that room? The three of you? Okay, 6 of you? Who's in that room deciding those timing and milestones?
So it starts with a guy named Leo Limbeck.
Okay.
Leo Limbeck was a professor of a family business course at Stanford that I attended.
Okay.
And all I needed was 3 words to learn from that class: early and often. That was what his main point was in business after business after business. He happens to be a Texas guy in Houston. And so a lot of the family businesses that he brought into the course were all Texas families. And everyone that had succession right said the same thing.
Wow.
Early and often. And so now that was a challenge for me, because as the youngest son and the class president kind of reputation, right? I always had an agenda. It's like you're pushing, you're trying to, you're growing too fast. And so all those things were there. So I had to really walk carefully there to make it look like what I was doing and what I'm pushing for, and having these conversations with my dad and my brother, and generally our CFO was kind of the arbiter of a lot of that. That was a real important, a real careful needle to thread, because I didn't want to look like I'm not trying to take over the business, but we got to figure this thing out.
Correct.
And we got to start thinking about it early. And now, I think the thing I often say, which just, I mean, if there were only one takeaway for every family, whenever I have a chance to talk about this, I always say the same thing: the success or failure of transition or succession from founder to Gen 2, and sometimes that's 2 to 3, but most often founder to G2. I think relies on one thing, and that is the humility of the founder. Full stop. Everything else you can do, you can have 1 million consultants in the room, it does not matter. If that man or woman is not ready and not willing to say somebody else is going to raise this child that I have done so far, it will not work. Or it will be met with incredible friction that makes it really hard for first and second gen. And by the way, that trickles down to the next succession, because you've learned a bad habit. And so John Scovell is the ultimate example of humility. And he was a guy that said, you know what? Like, if there's any chance for this company to keep going under this type of dynamic, the only way that happens is if I release control a lot sooner than I want to. And so he was willing to do that. He was willing to take that risk. And I think part of that is because his identity was not wrapped up in the business. If Woodbine failed, which it very well could have and still could, if Woodbine failed, John Scovell didn't feel like his reputation was wrapped up in that. He felt like what he had done was served that company well and stewarded those people well. And so then when I came into the company along with my brother, and we are now stewarding the business, naturally that DNA is similar. It's really thinking about, okay, well, this isn't about us and our paths. It really is about saying, how do we create a company that will be around for another 45 years?
How do you think your dad got there? How do you think your dad got there?
I mean, his dad. I mean, honestly, there's probably, it's a short path to, it doesn't take me long to answer that question, because my grandfather was the same way. I mean, my grandfather, who, along with Curtis Sanford, as I mentioned earlier, helped start the Cotton Bowl, people would ask him, what do you do for a living? And, he'd say, well, I'm a jockey strap salesman, because he worked for Rawlings. Or, when Joe Paterno or Bear Bryant, or you name Darryl Royal, or you name the coach that are at his funeral, because he knew all of them, the message was the same. Like he was a guy that never thought he was a big deal. So that travels.
How do you and your brother divide?
Great question.
Sure.
And kind of the next layer of that question is, I've got a sense for your skill set and how you're wired. Tell us how your brother's wired, so we kind of understand him, and that'll help us to understand the dynamic too.
Well, I think this is a big part of family businesses I think clear swim lanes, like understanding what each other does, but also having an attitude of deferring, I think is really important. I can't tell you how many conversations King and I have where it's like, hey, I want this, but if you think it should be something else, up to you. Like, I promise I will not throw a fit about it. And King does the same thing. It's like, okay, I see you're pushing this. I think we should go a direction, but if you want it, then we'll go that direction. Which, by the way, I have made some great decisions. So you learn from those things.
100%
on those. But I think the way we divide it up, it's helpful, because King and I have very different skill sets. If we had overlapping skill sets, we'd have to be a lot more intentional about how we operate. But generally, I really enjoy the culture and mission and vision and strategy side of the business. That comes with, whenever you're in a family, that doesn't mean I can make those decisions in a vacuum.
Right.
It means these are the things and direction that I feel like we should go. Now let's, as a team, start to formulate those and go, do you guys agree with these things? So I don't ever just send a letter to the company like, hey, here's the newsletter. It's like, okay, I'm writing that newsletter, and it's going, hey, King and Jim, our CFO, who are part of the triad of the investment committee or the executive committee. It's like, okay, does that make sense? Does this look like we're on the same page? Hey, I think we ought to go this direction on this culture issue. Does everybody agree with that? I always describe it almost like a church in some ways. We run like an elder board, which makes decisions sometimes a little bit slower, but every decision has to go through those three. And so there is a plurality of leadership that takes place where there is a required humility.
The balance of power.
Every one of your ideas has to go through that. It doesn't matter if it's the company logo or if it's we're buying this golf shirt for the Christmas gift. I mean, it literally it ranges the spectrum. And so to answer your question, that's kind of how we balance it. King really oversees all things construction, development, which that touches every asset, right? Whether it's a renovation, a CapEx project, or new build. And then I'll generally handle everything finance related. And then I really, as I mentioned, kind of enjoy the corporate side of the business that then we bring through the executive committee and kind of run together.
So is King more of an, intentional, steady, methodical?
Very much so. Like there's
and you operate in space.
The golf cart is wired to go a lot faster than the governor will let it go. And so that balance works. It creates some tension sometimes, for sure.
100%.
But
so how do you guys deal with that tension? Because we have the same thing at True North. Mark Gelbach, our co-founder, he was my roommate in college at Baylor, and very much we have a very similar dynamic. And I always say there's this push-pull going on, and if I'm super comfortable and he's really uncomfortable, we're probably going too fast.
Yeah.
If he's super comfortable and I'm really uncomfortable, we're probably going too slow. So the key is to find that pacing where we're both kind of like, okay.
Slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah, slightly uncomfortable, but we're okay.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I wouldn't add much to it. It does help because we have a third man in the room.
Yeah.
Jim Chiak, who's been with us for 38 years and has been critical to kind of go through all of these transition points with us. Any man or woman in that position where you're working in a family business in between two brothers.
Yeah.
Like a level of expertise and respect is required, but a level of humility is required too, where you have to say, okay, well, at the end of the day, this isn't my company.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think what Jim knows is we treat him like that, like he does own the company. We don't treat him like he doesn't own the company. But he's a part of those decisions. And so to have that arbiter there that is kind of, able to say, well, I actually think we should go this way. For King and I both to see him ever lean in one or the other direction, it's like game over. Like, all right, let's go. Yeah. And it's a full yield at that point. That really helps.
That helps
that person
a lot.
there.
Yeah.
How big is the team now?
We're probably 26 people and shouldn't be much bigger than that. The way we're designed, like an asset management firm, is the only reason you increase in personnel. This isn't the way it used to be, by the way. The only reason you increase in personnel is whether or not you are owning more assets, where you need more accountants and more asset managers. But everything else, the deal team, the construction team, all of those components ought to stay relatively small, because I had a front row seat for the 2008 crash, and I saw my dad go from 55 people to 20 people, and I said, I'm not gonna go through it if I can avoid it. And so King and I kind of created a little bit of an architecture that's unique, in that the way the company's set up is we'll do the number of deals that has the fee income or revenue that will support our existing overhead. And we don't need to do more than that. And so it's a natural governor for us, because otherwise I'd say,
yes. The answer is yes. Yeah. What's the deal again?
Of course.
Do you still have an LA office?
No, we don't. We shut that down. Now we have a little bit of ours is really more of a hub and spoke model. It's now pretty much all Dallas. We have remote in Phoenix and Florida. But for the most part now we kind of keep that team here.
Do you have distinct memories in the 3/4 of you? Because it sounds like the CFO has been in this transition. Peel the curtain back a little bit too, Dupree. What were some maybe critical moments where somebody was super one way? What were some real troubling discussion moments? How did you walk through those? Any come to mind, like, oh yeah, we were at such and such place and we could not agree. But
I won't say it's not agree. This is a True North discussion, because you guys have dealt with this, no doubt, hundreds of times. But I'll take a little bit of a pivot on that question. But the probably the hardest, I don't know. I mean, I think it is that. Probably one of the hardest conversations that I had is not one that you would necessarily expect, and which I think this is important, especially for G2 and G3s to understand, is when I understood the magnitude of what was being passed. That was a hard one for me. I think first was like, I remember at first actually that I didn't want to know. So I didn't want to know anything about any inheritance. I didn't want any of that stuff. I was like, as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't exist and I don't want to know it. So I basically avoided it. I think it was like when I was 30. When we were kind of planning on doing that, I said, I'm just not ready for it. I just don't want to know. And I didn't know if it was $10 or or $10 million. I had no idea. And so for me, I know thyself. I knew I wasn't ready for it. So I just said I'd rather not know it all. And so whenever we would have these meetings where it was kind of thinking about family stuff, I was very intentional for that planner to say, I don't want anything to do with it. Just we can talk about everything else and how things work and structure and dynamics and planning, but I don't want to know any numbers. And then I think when I was 35 was when I finally felt, I think we had to at that point, because now we were talking about how to buy the business.
Yeah.
And so it became
and run the business.
Yeah, because it became besides balance sheet, just the personal side.
Yeah.
It was really thinking about,
on the personal
the family side of it. How does that factor into how the estate planning goes? And so once I did find out, I did feel like I was ready at that point, and it naturally flowed into again all of how the acquisition of the business worked. But had I learned earlier, I don't think I would have been ready. I mean, I think that's where it's such a demotivator when all of a sudden, if you know there's something there. Doesn't matter how small it is. Doesn't matter if it's, if you thought it was 20 million and it ends up being 2 million, that's still demotivating. Doesn't matter if it's $1 million. It's something there that is now a pillow that you didn't know you had, or that you're aware of. And I didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing. That was a tough one for me to kind of learn how to do that.
One of the things, Dupree, I think you could help so many of our listeners with is, and you addressed it a little bit there, but how do families then, were you were actively telling your mom and dad, I don't want to know? So at 30 years old, were they saying, no, you need to know? How are you navigating some of these personal conversations? Guide some families right now, if they were in the room, coach them up a little bit on principles or discernment around having these conversations.
Well, I think there's some context required. Because where True North would have been massively beneficial to my dad is he waited until he'd been around the business for 30 years. He waited until he actually started putting together a plan. Right? He was not proactive. I don't fault him for it at all. He was focused on running the business, but he should have.
Yeah.
And he would say the same thing.
Correct. He's really normal. That's people are busy running the business and they forget or they don't take the time to go do some of this work.
It was wild. It's not wild to you guys. It was to us. There's 10 insurance policies with different companies, different brokers, because he coached with this guy and this guy was a college roommate, and that was like, oh my gosh, we're sorting that out. We didn't even know where half of them were.
Yeah.
Until we got a random letter or did one of those collections things. Then we start checking okay, we got some with Merrill Lynch, some with UBS, some in these private investments through UBS, some not with you. I mean, it was one of those things where we were untangling this thing and we're like, if something happens tomorrow, we are going to have no idea what is actually going on, including my mom, who, by the way, is like the most organized person ever.
Yep.
And so we had to really kind of sit down and start to clean the slate and go, okay, where do all these things, let's begin to bucket these together. Let's put them in the right place where you've got one point of contact and one manager. And so that was the first thing I would say is G1's got to get their act together and clean it up before you ever approach us, because we were building the plane while we were flying it. The second part of that, I think, is for I think it's rare that you give G2 the option to know or not. I think that's one thing that I would say a G1 needs to do, to know, go, hey, look, this is the potential impact of knowing this information. Do you want to know it? And I think giving them the respect of being able to answer with that, yes or no, hopefully they're mature enough to be able to handle that question. I certainly wouldn't have been at 20 or 25, I think is really important. And so that's one thing I would say. And then I think it's really, there needs to be some counseling and guidance given to that G2 to be able to say, now look, this is not yours. This means nothing for you. Like you can't look at it that way. You have to be able to say, I am fully focused on the mission that hopefully God has called me to. And that's what I'm focused on. And I'm not thinking about that. And I think when King and I had the ability to be in the business for so long and get in the practice of reinvesting everything, every distribution in the business, that was a key habit that then when we started to learn what was happening on the other side of the fence, you know, on my dad's personal balance sheet and mom's personal balance sheet, then it didn't matter. Because like, well, that doesn't change things. We're still right here. We've been trained in this habit of reinvesting, and now we'll be in a position where when it makes sense, then we'll be able to just make a distribution or something like that to us.
Dupree, there's about another hour I want to do, so maybe we'll do this again.
Sorry for all the front end, but you can cut as much as you want.
No, the front end, that's part of what telling, we've learned here, and from our perspective, there can be sound bites of business wisdom or life wisdom, but I know myself, I like to get to know who the person is.
Sure.
And so thank you very much
my
for
pleasure. Happy
the
to do it.
investment with us. And thank you for your investment in Decision Points. Have a great day.